The ship had no name that mattered to the stars. It drifted like a dead whale through the blackness of space, spinning slowly, catching no light, making no sound. Inside its metal belly, 12,000 human beings lay frozen in glass coffins, their hearts beating once every 9 minutes, their dreams empty and cold. The ship was called the Everfall, and it had been flying for over 800 years. Nobody was supposed to sleep that long. The Everfall had left Earth during the last golden age of mankind. The planet had been tired and overcrowded, and the governments of the world had come together for one final act of hope, a deep space colonization program. 12 ships were built, each one carrying thousands of frozen colonists toward distant stars. The Everfall was the 7th ship. It was supposed to reach a planet called Novo Horizon in 300 years. But something went wrong with the navigation system. A tiny error, barely the width of a hair in the calculations, sent the ship drifting off course. It flew past its target and kept going, deeper and deeper into unknown space, while every human on board slept and dreamed of nothing. 814 years after launch, a small alarm blinked to life deep inside the ship's core. A backup system, old and dusty with age, detected that the ship's fuel reserves had dropped below emergency levels. It triggered the revival sequence. Not for everyone, just for the command crew. Han Do-hyun was the first to open his eyes. The glass lid of his cryopod hissed and slid open. Cold white mist poured out like breath on a winter morning. Do-hyun lay still for a long time, staring at the ceiling. His body felt like it was made of stone. His muscles had not moved in centuries. His lungs burned as they filled with real air for the first time in 800 years. He tried to lift his hand, and it took him almost a full minute to close his fingers into a fist. He was 41 years old when he went to sleep. He was still 41, but the universe outside had aged without him. Slowly, painfully, he pulled himself out of the pod and collapsed onto the cold metal floor. He lay there, breathing, shaking, forcing his blood to remember how to move. Then he crawled to the command console and activated the rest of the command crew revival. 4 more pods opened. Yoon-jia woke up angry. That was normal for her. She had been the ship's chief combat engineer before the sleep, and she had argued loudly against the mission, calling the navigation systems unreliable. She had been right, and she was not the kind of woman who would let anyone forget it. She sat up in her pod, looked around the dark and dusty ship, and said one word that echoed through the empty hall. He was a former Special Forces soldier, a man built like a weapon, with calm eyes and hands that never shook. He checked his body the way a pilot checks an engine, joint by joint, muscle by muscle. He was operational. That was enough. Park Yuna woke up quietly. She was the youngest of the command crew, a systems specialist and communications officer with a mind that worked like a computer. She said nothing. She simply stood, walked to the nearest terminal, and began pulling data. Baek Sunho woke up last. He was the oldest, a historian and cultural advisor who had been included on the mission because the planners believed that a new colony would need someone who remembered where humanity came from. He sat on the edge of his pod, rubbed his face with thin hands, and waited for someone to tell him how bad things were. Things were very bad. Yuna's fingers moved fast across the console. Her face, still pale from the long freeze, grew even paler. She ran the scan 3 times before she spoke. "Captain," she said, her voice flat and careful. "We overshot Novo Horizon by approximately 500 light-years. Earth's last known communication signal is gone. I cannot find any human signals anywhere in range." Do-hyun leaned against the wall. "What can you find?" Yuna paused. "Everything else." The scanners showed a galaxy that was alive. Thousands of active signals filled the space around them. Communications, navigation beacons, energy signatures from engines and stations, and cities built on moons. The galaxy had grown up while humanity slept. Civilizations had risen, built empires, fought wars, and spread across the stars. But something was wrong with the signals. Gia noticed it first. "Why are half of these on emergency frequencies?" she asked, leaning over Yuna's shoulder. Yuna filtered the data. Signal after signal told the same story. Distress calls, surrender codes. Whole planets going silent, one after another, like candles being blown out. And underneath everything, one signal repeated across every frequency, in every language, on every channel. A single identifier that the translation system slowly decoded into 2 words: Venari Dominion. Baek Sunho sat in the corner and listened to the oldest signals Yuna could find. He was quiet for a long time. Then he looked up at Dohun with old, heavy eyes. "About 400 years ago," he said slowly, "a species called the Venari began conquering everything. Every species, every world, every system. They didn't negotiate, they didn't trade, they consumed. The signals tell the story clearly. One by one, civilizations either surrendered or were destroyed. The galaxy has been living under their rule ever since." The room went silent. 12,000 humans floated in a dead ship in the middle of a conquered galaxy, and nobody even knew they existed. He looked at each of his crew, Gia with her sharp, furious eyes, Taeho with his soldier's stillness, Yuna with her data and her quiet fear, Sunho with his heavy knowledge. "No broadcasts," Dohyun said. "No signals, no scans, nothing that can be traced. We go dark, we watch, we learn. Nobody out there knows we exist, and for now, that is the only advantage we have." They all agreed. The Everfall went silent. 3 days later, Park Yuna detected a small object drifting toward them, a tiny shuttle barely holding together, leaking air and energy. Its single occupant was alive, but only barely. It was not human. It was something none of them had ever seen before. A thin, bird-like creature with broken wings and desperate eyes. It was the first alien humanity had ever met. They brought the alien aboard carefully. Kang Taeho carried her through the airlock like she weighed nothing, which was nearly true. She was small and impossibly light, with hollow bones beneath skin that shimmered like wet feathers. Her arms ended in long, delicate fingers, and 2 folded wings hung from her back, torn and crusted with dried blood. Her eyes were large and golden, and they were filled with a kind of terror that went deeper than pain. The medical team, still shaking off centuries of cryosleep, worked fast. They sealed her wounds, they gave her oxygen, they pumped warm fluids into her veins, and watched her heartbeat, if that is what it was, stabilize on the monitor. She was alive. Barely, but alive. It took Yuna 6 hours to build a working translation system. She pulled language patterns from every alien signal the ship had captured, cross-referenced them with the few words the creature whispered in her half-sleep, and built a rough but functional bridge between their 2 languages. It was ugly and full of gaps, but it worked. When the alien finally opened her golden eyes and saw the faces looking down at her, she screamed. It was not a scream of pain. It was the scream of a creature that had spent its entire life running from predators and now believed it had been caught by new ones. She threw herself off the medical bed and crawled into the corner, pressing her broken wings against the wall, trembling so hard her feathers rattled like dry leaves. Dohyun crouched down slowly. He held out his hands, palms open, the way a man might approach a frightened animal. He stayed low. He stayed still. He waited. "We are not going to hurt you." The translation system turned his words into a string of soft, clicking sounds. The alien stared at him. Her golden eyes searched his face for something, for cruelty maybe, or for the cold emptiness she had learned to expect from the powerful. She did not find it. Slowly, over the course of an hour, she calmed down. Yuna brought her water. Tejo stood in the doorway, watching, his arms folded, but his face quiet. Jia ran scans of the alien shuttle, pulling apart its systems and studying them with hungry eyes. Sunho sat nearby and simply listened. Her name, as closely as the translation could manage, was real. She was an Orumi, one of an avian species that had once filled an entire star system with libraries, music halls, and floating cities. That was before the Venari came. Real told them everything. She spoke in short, broken sentences, and sometimes the translation failed, and she had to repeat herself 3 or 4 times. But the story came through clearly enough. It was a story of horror. The Venari were an insectoid species, massive, armored, cold. They did not build, they did not create, they took. 400 years ago, they had risen from their homeworld with an army so vast it darkened the stars, and they had swept across the galaxy like a fire through dry grass. Species that surrendered were enslaved. Species that fought were destroyed. There was no middle ground. There was no mercy. The Orumi had tried to reason with them. They had sent diplomats, scholars, poets. The Venari ate them, literally. Then they burned the Orumi homeworld, shattered their cities, and put the survivors to work in mining camps across a dozen moons. For 400 years, the Orumi had lived as slaves, their culture nearly erased, their population slowly dying. Riel was a messenger from the last free Orumi, a small group of survivors hiding inside a hollowed-out asteroid belt, far from Venari patrol routes. Their leader, an old one called Elder Talise, had sent Riel out into the void to search for anyone at all, who might help them. She has sent many messengers before me, Riel said quietly. None of them came back. Do-hyun looked at his crew. Kang Taeho spoke first. This is a war, he said. His voice was steady, the way it always was when he talked about fighting. And it is the kind of war that needs to be fought. Yoon Jia was not looking at anyone. She was staring at a screen full of data she had pulled from Riel's shuttle. Technical readouts of Venari ships, weapons, and shields. Her eyes were narrow and bright, with something that looked like disbelief. Captain, she said slowly, their technology is old. Everyone looked at her. I mean it, she continued, scrolling through the data. Their weapons are powerful, yes, but they are simple. Brute force energy systems, basic targeting, no adaptive countermeasures, no electronic warfare capability. Their shields are strong, but uniform, same frequency across every ship. Their engines are efficient, but unchanged in 4 centuries. She looked up. They conquered this galaxy with numbers and violence, not with intelligence, not with innovation. They found something that worked and never bothered to improve it. She pulled up another screen. The Everfall's own weapons manifest. Railgun arrays, adaptive drone swarms, kinetic bombardment systems, electronic countermeasures, signal jamming, tactical AI support. All of it designed by a species that had spent 10,000 years fighting itself, refining the art of killing into something almost beautiful. We are 800 years old, Jia said, and we are still ahead of them. The room was quiet. Do-hyun asked Riel to take them to Elder Talise. She agreed, trembling with something that might have been hope. The Orumi hideout was carved into the belly of a dead asteroid, hidden inside a field of spinning rocks and dust. It was small and dark and cold, and the few hundred Orumi who lived there moved like ghosts, thin, silent, afraid. They flinched when the humans walked among them. Elder Talise was waiting in a chamber lit by a single pale light. She was ancient, her feathers faded to gray, her wings folded tight against a body bent by centuries of grief. She looked at Do-hyun and his crew with eyes that had seen too much loss to trust anything easily. "Many species have promised to fight the Venari," she said. Her voice was thin but steady. "All of them are gone now. What makes you different?" It was Bae Sun-ho who answered. He stepped forward, this old man with soft eyes and thin hands, and he spoke with a quietness that somehow filled the whole room. "Because we spent our entire history learning how to destroy things stronger than us. It is the one thing we have always been good at." Talis stared at him for a long time. Then she looked at Do-hyun. "How many are you?" 12,000, Do-hyun said, still sleeping. 12,000 against an empire of billions, Talis whispered. "You are insane." Do-hyun almost smiled. "Yes," he said, "we usually are." He gave the order that night. Park Yuna initiated the full revival sequence aboard the Everfall. One by one, 12,000 cryopods began to open. 12,000 hearts began to beat at full speed. 12,000 pairs of human eyes opened in the dark. Humanity was waking up, and it was angry. The Everfall had never been loud. For 800 years, it had floated through space in perfect silence, carrying its frozen cargo like a coffin drifting on a dark ocean. But now, it roared. 12,000 people were awake, and every single one of them had questions. Han Do-hyun stood on the command platform above the main revival hall and watched as row after row of cryopods opened. Men and women stumbled out, shaking and confused, their muscles screaming, their lungs burning with fresh air. Medical teams moved between them, handing out water, blankets, and nutrient packs. Children, there had been children on this mission, were carried to heated rooms by soldiers who cradled them as gently as if they were made of glass. The questions came fast. Where are we? How long have we been asleep? Did we reach Novo Horizon? Where is Earth? Do-hyun answered them all at once. He stood before all 12,000 of them in the cargo bay, the largest open space on the ship, and he told them the truth. He did not soften it. He did not dress it up with hope or pretty words. He told them that they had overshot their destination by 500 light years. He told them that Earth's signals were gone and that they had no way to go back. He told them that the galaxy they had woken up in was controlled by a brutal alien empire called the Venari, and that billions of living beings across hundreds of worlds were suffering under their rule. And then he told them about the Orumi, about Real with her broken wings, about Elder Talis and her handful of survivors hiding in a dead rock, about the distress signals that filled every frequency, the cries for help that no one had answered in 400 years. The cargo bay was silent when he finished. 12,000 people stood still, their breath hanging in the cold air. Some of them wept. Some of them stared at nothing. Some of them clenched their fists so hard their knuckles turned white. Nobody panicked. Nobody screamed. Nobody ran. A woman near the front, a sergeant from the ship's military division, spoke up. Her voice was rough and raw from centuries of disuse, but her words were clear. "What do you need us to do, Captain?" Do-hyun looked at her. Then he looked at all of them. "Everything," he said. And they did everything. Yoon Jia took command of the engineering corps, over 3,000 specialists, mechanics, fabricators, and weapons technicians, and she turned the Everfall into a factory. The ship's onboard fabrication systems, designed to build colony infrastructure on a new world, were repurposed for war. Mining drones were launched at nearby asteroids, and within days, raw metals and minerals were flowing back to the ship in a constant stream. Jia worked without sleep. She redesigned weapons systems, optimized power grids, and built things that the original mission planners had never imagined. Fighter-class shuttles were assembled from colony transport frames. Railgun turrets were mounted on cargo pods. Drone swarms, small, fast, and deadly, were manufactured by the hundreds and stored in launch bays that had been meant for farming equipment. But her greatest achievement was something quieter. She took the Venari FTL drive that Real's shuttle carried, disassembled it piece by piece, studied every component, and then rebuilt it better. She integrated the alien faster-than-light technology into human systems in 19 days. 19 days. It had taken the Venari over 200 years to develop the same technology. Gia did it in less than 3 weeks with spare parts and stolen data. When she showed the working prototype to the Arumi engineers who had come aboard to help, they stood in stunned silence. One of them turned to another and said something that the translation system rendered as, "They learn the way fire learns, by consuming everything they touch." Kang Taeho took the soldiers. There were just over 4,000 military personnel on the Everfall, ranging from infantry grunts to special operations veterans. Taeho organized them into strike battalions, each one designed for a specific type of combat: shipboarding, ground assault, electronic warfare, sabotage, and psychological operations. He trained them hard. The corridors of the Everfall became training grounds. Empty cargo bays became shooting ranges. Soldiers ran combat drills in zero gravity, in darkness, in smoke-filled hallways. Taeho pushed them until they broke, and then he put them back together stronger. He did not just train them to fight. He trained them to think, to adapt, to improvise, to turn every disadvantage into a weapon. The Venari fight like a hammer, he told his soldiers. One direction, one speed, maximum force. We are not going to fight like a hammer. We are going to fight like water. We go around them, through them, under them, and by the time they realize what happened, they are already drowning. Park Yuna, meanwhile, fought her own silent war. She cracked the Venari communication encryption in 11 days, and began feeding the command team a steady stream of intercepted intelligence. She mapped fleet movements. She identified supply lines, garrison strengths, patrol schedules, and command hierarchies. She learned everything about the enemy without them ever knowing she existed. And she found their weakness. Their command structure is completely centralized, she told Do-hyun during a late-night briefing. Every fleet, every garrison, every patrol answers to a single command ship. If you destroy the command ship, the rest of the fleet loses coordination. They do not think for themselves, they do not adapt. They wait for orders, and when orders stop coming, they stop fighting. Do-hyun nodded slowly. An empire of followers, he said. An empire that has never needed to be anything else, Yuna replied. No one has ever challenged them hard enough to expose the flaw. Baek Soon-ho spent his days with the Orumi. He walked among them in their asteroid hideout, learning their language properly, listening to their stories, studying their history. He was a historian, and he understood something that the soldiers and engineers did not. That this war would not be won with weapons alone. It would be won when the enslaved species of the galaxy believed that victory was possible. And belief was built with stories, not guns. He told the Arumi about human history. He told them about small armies that defeated empires, about enslaved people who freed themselves, about cities that burned and were rebuilt, about the 1,000 times humanity had been knocked to the ground, and the 1,001 times it had stood back up. The Arumi listened with wide golden eyes. They had never heard stories like these. In their world, the strong consumed the weak, and that was the end of it. The idea that the weak could rise, that defeat was not permanent, was something entirely new. It spread through the asteroid hideout, like warmth through frozen bones. Do-hyun chose their first target carefully. It was not a fortress or a capital. It was a small mining moon called Reth 4, where 3,000 Arumi slaves worked in darkness, pulling ore from the ground for Venari war machines. The garrison was small. The strategic value was low, but the symbolic value was enormous. "We are not starting a war," Do-hyun told his command crew as they gathered around the tactical display. "We are sending a message. Every slave in this galaxy needs to know that someone is fighting for them. Reth 4 is where the message begins." Jia confirmed the fleet was ready. Taeho confirmed the soldiers were ready. Yuna confirmed the intelligence was solid. Sunho simply nodded. The human fleet, 300 ships cobbled together from colony transports, cargo haulers, and mining vessels, all of them armed with weapons that should not have existed, powered up their stolen FTL drives, and jumped. For the first time in 800 years, humanity moved through the stars at faster than light. For the first time in 400 years, something in the galaxy moved toward the Venari instead of away from them. The war had begun. The Venari garrison on Reth 4 had not seen combat in over a century. There was no need. The 3,000 Orami slaves who worked the mines were thin, broken, and terrified. They did what they were told. They dug until their hands bled, and when they collapsed, they were dragged aside and replaced. The Venari guards patrolled the surface with the lazy confidence of predators who had never met anything that could bite back. They did not even detect the human fleet until it was already on top of them. Park Yuna struck first. From the command bridge of the Everfall, she activated a signal jamming array so powerful that every Venari communication device on and around Reth 4 went dead at the same instant. Radios, data links, emergency beacons, everything went silent. The garrison commander, a massive Venari officer with scarred armor and dull eyes, stared at his communication console as it filled with static. He had never experienced this before. No one had ever cut his voice from the Dominion's network. For the first time in his life, he was alone. Then the drones came. Yoon-jia had built them by the hundreds, small, fast, and impossibly precise. They poured out of the human ships like a swarm of silver insects, moving in patterns that no Venari targeting system could predict. They struck the orbital defense platforms first, cutting through armor plating and power conduits with focused energy beams. One by one, the platforms went dark. The entire orbital battle lasted 4 minutes. The Venari gunners never managed to fire a single shot that hit anything. With the sky cleared, Kang Taeho went down. He led 3 assault shuttles through the thin atmosphere of Reth 4, dropping fast and hard toward the mining complex. The shuttles hit the ground with their doors already open, and human soldiers poured out into the gray dust of the moon's surface. They moved in tight formations, fast and low, their weapons up, their communication systems running on encrypted frequencies the Venari could not even detect. The garrison tried to fight. The Venari soldiers were big, each one standing nearly 3 meters tall, covered in natural armor plating, with jaws that could crush metal. They charged at the humans with the blind aggression of creatures that had never needed tactics. They roared. They swung massive limbs. They fired heavy energy weapons that turned rock into glass. It did not matter. Taeho's soldiers did not stand and trade blows with monsters. They moved like ghosts. They flanked. They used cover. They targeted joints and sensor organs with precise fire. They threw flashbang grenades that overloaded Venari sensory systems, leaving the giant creatures stumbling and blind. They used the narrow corridors of the mining complex to neutralize the enemy's size advantage, drawing them into kill zones where overlapping fields of fire turned every hallway into a death trap. The garrison commander tried to rally his troops, but without communications his orders reached no one. He stood in the command center, watching his forces collapse on the security feeds, and for the first time in his long career, he felt something he had only ever seen in the eyes of slaves: fear. The battle lasted 2 hours and 47 minutes. Every Venari soldier on Reth 4 was either killed or captured. Not a single human died. 3 were wounded. Kang Taeho later said it was the cleanest operation he had ever run, and he did not look proud when he said it. He looked hungry. Then came the part that mattered most. Taeho's soldiers opened the mineshafts. They cut through the locked doors with plasma torches and walked into the darkness below. What they found there would haunt many of them for the rest of their lives. 3,000 Orami, packed into tunnels barely tall enough to stand in. Their feathers were gone, rubbed away by years of grinding labor. Their wings had been clipped so short they were nothing but scarred stumps. Their eyes, once golden and bright, were dull and empty. Many of them did not even look up when the doors opened. They had stopped expecting anything from open doors a long time ago. A young human soldier, a private barely out of training, was the first one into the deepest shaft. He found an Orami child sitting alone in the dark, too weak to move, clutching a piece of rock that she had scratched a picture into. It was a bird, flying. The private picked her up. She weighed almost nothing. She looked at his face with those dull golden eyes, and then she did something that broke him. She tried to make herself smaller in his arms, because every large creature she had ever known had only ever brought pain. He held her gently and carried her out into the light. When the freed Orumi finally understood what had happened, that the monsters above them had been destroyed, that the beings carrying them out of the mines were not new masters but liberators, the reaction was something no one on either side had words for. Some fell to the ground, some clutched at the human soldiers, touching their faces and arms as if to make sure they were real. Some simply stood in the open air of Reth 4's surface and looked up at the sky for the first time in years, and they wept without sound. Elder Talise arrived on the next transport from the asteroid hideout. She walked through the freed mining complex, stepping over Venari bodies, and she stopped in front of Han Do-hyun. Her old golden eyes were wet. "You actually did it," she whispered. "This was one moon," Do-hyun said quietly. "There are thousands more. Then free them all." News of Reth 4 spread fast. Yuna made sure of it. She hijacked every open communication channel in the sector. Venari military frequencies, civilian networks, emergency bands, everything. And she broadcast a message. It was simple, translated into every language her systems had decoded, and it repeated on a loop. "We are humanity. We have been asleep for 800 years. We are awake now. The Venari took Reth 4 from you. We took it back. We are coming for every chain in this galaxy. If you can hear this, know that you are not alone anymore." The effect was like dropping a match into a pool of fuel that had been building for centuries. On a jungle world 3 systems away, a species of reptilian farmers who had lived under Venari taxation for generations heard the message and began hiding weapons in their grain stores. On a water planet in the Outer Rim, an aquatic species that had been forced to harvest minerals from their own ocean floor sent a coded reply. Just 2 words, "We hear." On a dozen space stations and 100 mining colonies, slaves who had given up hope looked at each other with something new in their eyes. The Venari Dominion heard the message too. Overlord Dreth sat in his throne chamber aboard the largest warship in the galaxy, a vessel so massive it had its own gravity. He listened to the human broadcast 3 times. His advisors explained that an unknown species had destroyed the garrison on Reth 4 in less than 3 hours. They showed him the tactical data. They showed him the communication logs. They told him that resistance movements were already stirring on multiple worlds. Dreth was ancient. He had ruled the Dominion for over 200 years. He had personally overseen the destruction of 6 civilizations. He had crushed every rebellion, silenced every voice, broken every spirit that dared to rise against him. He had never lost. But as he listened to the human message repeat for the 4th time, something cold moved through his body. Not fear, not yet, but the distant memory of what fear might feel like. He gave an order. Assemble the war fleet. 4,000 ships. Find these creatures. Burn them from the sky. The fleet began to gather. Far away, on the bridge of the Everfall, Park Yuna's long-range sensors lit up like a sunrise. She looked at the data, and then she looked at Do-hyun. They are coming, she said. 4,000 warships. They will be here in 11 days. Do-hyun stared at the screen. 4,000 ships against his 300. He should have been afraid. Instead, he turned to Kang Tae-ho and said, "Find me the right place to fight." Tae-ho smiled. It was not a kind smile. "I already have." The place Kang Tae-ho chose was called the Hollow Reach, a vast stretch of empty space between two dead star systems, where nothing lived, nothing grew, and nothing mattered. It was the kind of place that mapmakers left blank. The kind of place where things disappeared. That was exactly why Tae-ho chose it. For 11 days, the humans worked. They did not sleep much. They did not need to be told what was at stake. Every man and woman on the Everfall understood that what happened in the Hollow Reach would decide whether humanity lived or died in this galaxy, and whether billions of enslaved beings would ever see freedom. Yoon Jia filled the Hollow Reach with nightmares. She seeded the empty space with thousands of stealth mines, each one invisible to Venari sensors, each one packed with enough explosive force to crack a warship in half. Between the mines, she hid drone carriers. Dark, silent pods that floated like dead rocks. Each one carrying 100 attack drones waiting to wake up. She placed signal jammers in a wide ring around the entire battlefield, each one tuned to the exact frequency of Venari communications. And at the center of it all, she placed the bait, the human fleet. 300 ships, arranged in a formation that looked desperate and exposed. "They need to think we are trapped," Do-hyun said during the final briefing. "They need to believe this will be easy. The Venari have never fought anything that surprised them. We are going to surprise them so badly, they forget how to think." Park Yuna intercepted the Venari fleet's communications as they approached. Overlord Dreth commanded from his throne ship at the rear of the armada. A vessel the size of a small city, bristling with weapons, surrounded by a personal guard of 200 heavy warships. He had not come to fight a battle. He had come to perform an execution. His orders to the fleet were simple: advance, surround, destroy. No survivors. The Venari armada dropped out of FTL on the edge of the Hollow Reach. 4,000 warships, arranged in a massive wall of metal and firepower, their hulls dark and heavy against the stars. They outnumbered the human fleet more than 13 to 1. Their combined firepower could have burned the surface off a planet. Dreth looked at the tiny human formation on his display and felt something close to disappointment. This was what had destroyed his garrison on Reth 4? This handful of shits? He gave the order to advance. The Venari fleet moved forward in a single massive formation, tight, disciplined, and exactly as predictable as Do-hyun had expected. They flew straight into the Hollow Reach, like a fist punching into darkness. He stood on the bridge of the Everfall, his hands behind his back, his face calm. Beside him, Yuna counted down the distance. Jia's hand rested on the activation console. Tae-ho stood in the boarding shuttle bay 3 decks below, his soldiers locked and ready. Sunho sat in the communications room, prepared to send a message that the galaxy would never forget. The Venari fleet crossed the threshold. "Now," Do-hyun said. Everything happened at once. Yuna activated the signal jammers. In a single instant, every Venari ship in the Hollow Reach lost contact with every other Venari ship. 4,000 warships went deaf and blind at the same moment. Commanders screamed orders into dead channels. Navigation systems spun wildly as false signals flooded their instruments. The tight, disciplined formation began to break apart as ships lost coordination and drifted into each other's paths. Then the mines woke up. The first wave of explosions tore through the center of the Venari formation like lightning through a forest. Ships that had been flying in perfect rows suddenly vanished in balls of white fire. The shockwaves pushed other ships off course, spinning them into the paths of more mines. Chain reactions rippled through the fleet. In the first 90 seconds, over 300 Venari warships were destroyed or crippled, without a single human ship firing a shot. Then the drones came. Gia's hidden carriers opened like flowers blooming in the dark. Tens of thousands of attack drones poured into the battlefield, each one small, fast, and guided by targeting systems that the Venari could not jam because they had never encountered anything like them. The drones did not aim for hulls. They aimed for engines, weapon systems, and sensor arrays. They blinded the Venari ships, crippled their guns, and cut their ability to move. Ships that could have fought back became floating metal coffins, drifting helplessly in the dark. Now the human fleet attacked. Dohyun's 300 ships surged forward in formations that changed every 30 seconds, splitting, merging, flanking, retreating, and striking again from new angles. The Venari had never seen anything move like this. Their combat doctrine was built on overwhelming force applied in a straight line. They did not know how to fight an enemy that refused to stand still. The Everfall's railguns fired. Each shot was a simple thing, a rod of tungsten, 1 meter long, accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light. The rods hit Venari warships with the force of small nuclear explosions, punching clean through from bow to stern. Capital ships that had conquered entire worlds broke apart like toys. Kinetic kill vehicles, larger tungsten projectiles launched from concealed positions, struck the heaviest Venari cruisers. One of them hit a dreadnought-class vessel directly in its reactor core. The explosion was so bright that human pilots 300 kilometers away had to shield their eyes. And through it all, Kang Taeho fought his own war. His boarding teams, 500 of the most dangerous human beings ever trained, launched from the shuttle bays in fast assault craft and latched onto Venari command ships like parasites. They cut through hulls with breaching charges, poured inside, and began dismantling the ships from within. The Venari soldiers inside were terrifying up close. 3 meters tall, armored in natural chitin, strong enough to tear metal apart with their bare claws. But they fought the way they had always fought, charging forward, relying on size and strength, expecting their enemy to break and run. The humans did not break. They did not run. Taeho's soldiers used every corridor, every doorway, every shadow. They moved in pairs, covering each other, communicating with hand signals when their radios were too risky. They placed explosive charges on reactor feeds. They vented compartments into space. They turned the Venari's own ships into traps, sealing doors behind enemy squads and flooding rooms with fire suppression foam that blinded and suffocated. One by one, the Venari command ships fell silent. Without their command ships, the rest of the Venari fleet collapsed. Thousands of warships, crewed by soldiers who had never been taught to think for themselves, simply stopped fighting. Some tried to flee. Some drifted aimlessly, waiting for orders that would never come. Some, for the first time in the history of the Venari species, transmitted surrender signals. The Battle of the Hollow Reach lasted 6 hours. When it was over, more than 2,000 Venari warships had been destroyed. Another 1,000 had surrendered or been disabled. The rest had scattered into deep space, running from something they could not understand. Humanity lost 22 ships, 41 soldiers died. Their names were recorded in the Everfall's memory banks, and Baek Sun-ho read each one aloud over the ship's speakers, while the crew stood in silence. But the battle was not over. Not yet. Do-hyun took a strike team of 50 soldiers and flew directly to Overlord Dreth's throne ship. It was still intact. Its personal guard had been destroyed, but the massive vessel itself had survived, drifting at the edge of the battlefield, with its engines dead and its weapons cold. The corridors inside were vast and dark, built for creatures much larger than humans. Do-hyun's team moved through them in silence, their flashlights cutting narrow beams through the gloom. They found dead Venari guards everywhere, killed not by human weapons, but by panic. They had turned on each other when the communications failed, unable to coordinate, unable to function without orders from above. Do-hyun found Dreth in his throne chamber. The Overlord sat on a massive seat carved from black stone, his 4 arms resting on its sides, his dark eyes watching the door. He was enormous, nearly 4 meters tall, his chitinous armor cracked with age, his body scarred from wars fought centuries ago. He did not move when Do-hyun entered. He did not attack. He simply looked at the small human standing before him and spoke. The translation system in Do-hyun's earpiece turned the Overlord's deep rumble into words. "What are you?" Do-hyun looked up at the ancient conqueror. This creature had burned worlds. He had enslaved billions. He had ruled the galaxy through fear for longer than most civilizations existed. "We are what happens when you let a predator sleep for too long," Do-hyun said. They took Dreth alive. Yuna broadcast his capture across every channel in the galaxy. She sent images, data, proof. The Overlord of the Venari Dominion, the most feared being in the known universe, was shown in restraints aboard a human ship. His empire shattered around him. The effect was immediate and unstoppable. On every enslaved world, on every mining colony, on every space station where beings had lived in chains, the reaction was the same. They rose. Not because the humans told them to, not because anyone gave them permission. They rose because they finally believed they could. The Venari Dominion did not fall in a day. It crumbled over weeks and months, as its grip loosened system by system, world by world. Without Dreth, without the fleet, without the fear that had held everything together, the empire dissolved like smoke in the wind. Humanity, still only 12,000 strong, became the center of a new galactic coalition. Not rulers, not conquerors, advisors, teachers, soldiers who helped others learn to fight for themselves. On the bridge of the Everfall, weeks after the battle, Elder Talis stood beside Do-hyun and looked out at the stars. Her old feathers caught the light from a nearby sun, and for the first time in Do-hyun's memory, she looked something other than sad. She looked alive. "We prayed for centuries for someone to save us," she said softly. Baek Sun-ho stood nearby. He looked at Talis with his quiet, gentle eyes, and he shook his head. "We did not come to save you," he said. "We came to wake you up. Now you save yourselves." Talis looked at him. Then she looked at the stars, the same stars that had watched her people suffer for 400 years. She straightened her old back. She lifted her faded wings, and for the first time in a very long time, she smiled. The galaxy had known terror for centuries. It had known conquest and chains and silence. But now it was learning something new, something it had never encountered in all its long, dark history. It was learning what happened when humanity entered the war. And the galaxy would never be the same again.